Hello and welcome. Against the windswept backdrop of Scotland, a pivotal transatlantic summit unfolds as President Donald Trump and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen meet. The shadow of looming tariff deadlines and stark disagreements on migration and energy policy loom large. Is this encounter a genuine step towards a mutually beneficial trade deal, or a stage for Trump to deliver pointed messages to Europe? With protests echoing and the fate of the US-EU trade relationship hanging in the balance, the world watches this high-stakes diplomatic dance where commerce and politics are deeply intertwined. I'm Mark Summers. Welcome to Think Tank.
Our world is becoming unhinged.
Welcome to the program. The New York Times has reported that the return of President Trump to his Scottish resort, Turnberry, marks a symbolic full-circle moment. 8 years after applauding Brexit as a predictor of global populist trends, Trump now finds a mixed legacy. While populism persists in pockets like Italy and Hungary, Brexit itself is widely regretted in Britain, with polls showing a majority now view it as a mistake. The enduring political and economic challenges faced by post-Brexit Britain highlight the complexities and costs of such nationalist movements. Yet Trump's influence is evident as he hosts high-level meetings, including with EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, focusing on trade. This juxtaposition underscores the ongoing tension between nationalist ideals and the practical necessities of international cooperation in today's interconnected world. Meanwhile, according to The Guardian, in a critical juncture for global trade, President Trump, during his private visit to Scotland, intensified pressure on Europe. He demanded the EU get your act together on immigration and criticise renewable energy. The high-stakes negotiations aim to avert a costly trade war, with 20 sticking points highlighted by Trump. Despite the contentious rhetoric, a potential outline agreement on tariffs for cars and pharmaceuticals is on the table, offering a glimmer of hope for de-escalation. This summit underscores the volatile nature of international relations, where personal convictions often intersect with geopolitical and economic imperatives. The outcome will undoubtedly shape future transatlantic trade dynamics. And the Washington Post has highlighted that US President Donald Trump convenes a pivotal meeting with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. This high-stakes encounter unfolds as Trump's self-imposed deadline for imposing steep EU tariffs looms, casting uncertainty over transatlantic trade relations. The closed-door discussions centre on renegotiating tariff rates, with Trump candidly assessing the deal's chances at 50-50. Trump's strategy of wielding tariff threats as negotiating leverage continues to define his international economic approach, despite mixed results globally. While a recent agreement with Japan offers a counterpoint, the EU remains a critical yet contentious partner. Von der Leyen's proactive engagement signals Europe's desire to avert a trade war, highlighting the delicate balance between economic protection and cooperation. Scotland becomes the unexpected stage for high-stakes diplomacy as Trump's personal playground hosts pivotal EU-US negotiations where tariffs, tanks, and world economic storms converge.
negotiate, and possibly converge on trade, energy, and Ukraine. Why Scotland? Not just for golf, but for influence. Trump owns the Turnberry Resort, making this a rare fusion of possible interest and global diplomacy. But beyond optics, the stakes are real. With the looming tariff deadline, both leaders face pressure to deliver or risk economic fallout. Von der Leyen arrives with a clear message. Europe seeks a strong strategic partnership, but not at any cost. The EU stands firm on climate goals, even as Trump criticizes wind energy and pushes Europe to get its act together on migration. Trump's recent remarks on immigration and green energy are no offhand comments. They are negotiation tactics, leverage points designed to extract concessions from an EU wary of US trade demands.
Life was saved.
Public sentiment is tense. Demonstrations outside Trump's resort highlight growing unease over the blending of commerce and politics. And then there is Ukraine. As Trump pushes for burden sharing, Europe watches closely. Will this meeting bolster Kiev's war effort to expose cracking in Western unity? Von der Leyen emphasizes shared values, but behind closed doors, the EU may have to weigh concessions against long-term strategic autonomy. This is not just about tariffs. It's about power, influence, and the future of the transatlantic alliance. In Scotland, where land meets sea, the world watches a trade deal or a political deal. The answer may determine the course of global economics for years to come.
Now, to provide some analysis on the latest and all about this visit to Scotland by President Trump and the meeting with Ursula von der Leyen, we are joined from Washington by Justin Thomas Russell, who's a Global Foreign Policy Centre Executive Director, and from Paris by Meher Nicolas Fursley, who's the Director of the EU Asian Centre. Welcome to Think Tank, both of you. I'll start with you, Justin Thomas Russell. So Trump's gone to Turnberry, his Scottish golf course. It was supposed to be a private sort of a trip. Now he's summoned the EU President Ursula von der Leyen to come and see him there, almost like it's the Scottish branch of Mar-a-Lago. So he's going there and she's going there. They're having this meeting. What is he hoping to get from the EU? What concessions do you think he's hoping to extract?
Well, first of all, it's good to see you as always, Mark. I think what he's trying to do is he's up against the ceiling of his own self-imposed deadline of the end of this coming week to make all of the tariff deals or the big tariff numbers go into play. What we're seeing is kind of a last-ditch effort by the Trump administration to be able to secure a large-scale deal with our largest trading partners, and in this case, the EU. The issue is Donald Trump is starting to realize that this is starting to backfire. His own advisors are starting to realize it's going to backfire. We saw the deal that Keir Starmer did with Indian President Modi this week, announcing one of the biggest trade agreements between England and India. The I in BRICS is India. So we're starting to see a lot more leverage of the BRICS alliance, that being Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. That is a huge alarm to those here in the United States, because now we don't have the leverage to be able to strong arm these deals the way we used to. And I think that that's what Donald Trump's trying to do, even soften the blow, but he's got to come up with a deal or else this is going to hurt him politically, both internationally and domestically.
And coming to you, Nick Fursley, this is a strange venue, isn't it, for this meeting, to meet in Scotland, not to go to one of the EU countries and visit and have a meeting with the president of the EU, but to make her come and visit him at his golf course in Scotland. Is this kind of some kind of gameplay, do you think?
Well, it was Trump in the White House. So for the past 7 months, the world entered a new era called the age of geoeconomics. And the most important term or part of the term is not economics, it's geo. So Trump is a big believer in power play, theatrical power play, and geography, the location in theater. The most important part is the location, the stage, right? And so first, he's forcing von der Leyen to come onto his stage. So that's a sign of power because she accepted, she agreed not to meet on neutral territory. She's coming on his turf. So symbolically, she's yielding to pressure from Trump. But there's more than that. People could say that, Trump's mother, Marianne MacLeod, was Scottish after all. So romantically, or he has family ties, Scotland. But I think it's not the main reason. I think, many of the founding fathers of the American nations, even though, most colonists were English, and the Scots were a small ethnic minority, the Scottish people were overrepresented amongst the first American presidents and the leaders of the American Revolution who founded America as a nation. James Madison, John Adams, Alexander Hamilton, James Monroe were all Scots. So the biggest newspapers, magazines, the most influential presidents in America, apart from George Washington, were all Scottish. And I think symbolically it's important because Scotland is intimately linked to America. The religion, the non-Anglican Protestant theology is Scottish. American universities, the Ivy League universities were founded by Scottish professors, Scottish intellectuals. So the deep is very strong. The ties are very deep and very strong. I think that's the reason. I would disagree, politely and humbly with Justin. I think unlike what happened in April, May of this year, when Trump started his trade liberation realignment, I think the balance of power was in the hand of the European Union and China. So the first, 2 months of Trump's great trade war were a failure. However, in the past 6-7 weeks, Trump has completely changed the situation by signing a truce with China, by signing very important trade deals with the UK, Vietnam, Indonesia, and China, and Singapore. So now the balance of power is in Trump's hand, and Europe, the EU, is very weak and isolated, and he knows that.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll come back to you. You can comment on what Mr. Fuzzy just said there, Mr. Russell, if you would like. But how do you interpret Trump's recent statements regarding the EU? And says Europe needs to sort out the migration issue. He said he's been very critical of wind energy. I think he's upset that it kills birds. Or he says it kills birds anyway. What's the underlying political message? He seems very, very anti-Europe, apart from Britain, it seems.
Well, again, I mean, in his mind, Britain isn't part of Europe. When they broke away in Brexit, they became independent. That's kind of his mantra. Regarding wind energy, I don't know even how to unwrap what he says about green energy. He was just talking, not within the hour, about how the windmills make the whales angry. Come on. Really? This is what you're focused on green energy? Mr. President, really. Look, the bottom line here is that, his anti-green energy is because he wants to say that the U.S. has energy dominance, which it does. It wants to say that it is energy independent, which it kind of is. He gets a lot of funding from the energy industry, which he has. So he's going to be pro traditional energy and not so much green energy. Look, we saw that kind of break up the love fest between Elon Musk and Donald Trump. So it's all over the place when it comes to green energy. When it comes to the EU, I think, I got to push back a little bit on what my colleague Nick was saying. The reality is, look, he still doesn't have a deal with China. This idea that there's a deal with China, you talk to anybody in the Chinese delegation or even here in Washington, they'll tell you there's no deal. There's maybe 7 or 8 deals that are in place right now. Far cry from what they were hoping to have in place at this time. But make no mistake about it is, what we've seen in the past 14 days is in fact a change in the narrative of we are the best trading partner to have. And in the past 14 days, particularly with the deal between India and the UK and China and the EU, what we're seeing is that there are alternatives. And those alternatives pose a distinct economic threat to the global economic dominance that the U.S. has had forever. So that is something I think. I don't think that the EU president is showing any weakness. I think she's showing a little bit of humility. I think she's going in there knowing that she's going to be very gracious. She's going to be very understanding. I don't see this as a sign of weakness. In fact, I think it shows, particularly with the fact that Scotland was directly in opposition to the removal of England and the UK from Brexit. I think this is a very strategic sign by Ursula to go in there and show the fact that, look, you know what? You're going to come over to this side of the pond. I'll meet with you. I wouldn't read too much into the into the kabuki dance that's happening there at Turnberry.
Okay.
This is a very, very smart move by the EU.
Okay. So it's strange. We've got you in Washington being pro-EU, and then we've got Nick in Paris who's saying that they're isolated and quite weak. So does Ursula von der Leyen's engagement then, in your view, Nick, mean or signal that she's ready to compromise and that the EU is worried about what will happen on August the 1st? But because of course the EU is quite a substantial, a massive economic bloc in itself.
It is indeed. It is indeed. However, the EU needs international trade much more than America. So basically, in that great globalization game, the Europeans became more open. And so they are weaker in a way, or more fragile, because they're more exposed to a realignment of world trade, right? America is more contained. America doesn't need to export its goods and services as much as, say, Italy or Germany or France. So these countries, the 3 biggest members of the European Union, Paris, Berlin, Rome, without exporting lots of goods and services, their economies would collapse in a few weeks. Back to what Justin said, which is fascinating, and it's great to disagree because it forces us to do mental gymnastics. Ursula von der Leyen was in Beijing 2 days ago, and she was actually supposed to fly back from Beijing to Brussels yesterday night. And what happened in Beijing was a drama because the Chinese party, Chairman Xi Jinping, decided abruptly to cut down the negotiations with the Europeans. So they were humiliated. And, Antonio Costa and Ursula von der Leyen, they had to leave Beijing earlier than planned and fly back to Brussels. So they were hoping the European, once again, politics is theater, by going theatrically to Beijing and spending 2-3 days with the Politburo of the Chinese Communist Party, they were hoping to send a signal to Washington and say, look, we have an alternative. We have latitude. And in reality, by treating them harshly, because the Europeans were in Beijing, they made no concession, of course, so the Chinese realized it was a joke, because Ursula von der Leyen and Antonio Costa focused most of the talk on one issue, which is climate finance and global warming. So you don't go to Beijing and fly 8,000 kilometers to China to meet with the most important leaders in the world to lecture them about climate finance. They missed an opportunity to talk about microchips. The Chinese wanted to talk about microchip foundries. And why are they weak? Back to what Justin said earlier. Today, there's one American company, NVIDIA. The market cap, so the market value of one American company called NVIDIA today, is bigger than the market value of all EU and UK companies put together. So all the companies listed on the London, Berlin, Milan, Frankfurt, Paris exchange, together, they are smaller than one company called NVIDIA. 2 years ago, there was a European company called ASML, a French-Dutch company, which was bigger than NVIDIA. And today ASML is collapsing. So that tale, that story of the most important sector in the world economy today, advanced microchip foundries, the comparison of Europe's ASML to NVIDIA, that alone shows you the weakness, the cruel weakness and slowdown and decline of the European economy. So Ursula von der Leyen is meeting Trump on his turf at the worst possible time for Europe.
Okay. But Justin, Washington will have noticed this little trip to Beijing nevertheless, will they not? Do you think Europe can afford significant tariff concessions when it comes to these talks with Trump?
Can they afford it? That's arguable right now. Look, here's the reality. What a lot of Americans do not understand, and this is something that our organization continues to try and promote, is we don't have a choice. The world is the economies of the world. This is a geo-economic world now. We don't have a choice. The reliance on China and the U.S., quite frankly, this goes back to our point of the mutually assured economic destruction concept that we've brought together, is that we can get into a trade war with China and we go into a global economic winter, nuclear winter possibly. The U.S. has become very, very, very dependent on cheap goods brought in from China. That being the case, as much as Trump would love to think that we are somehow independently able to manufacture all these products here, we don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the factory capacity, we definitely don't have the workforce, and we don't have the backup infrastructure or the minerals to do it and do it to match the prices that Americans are paying right now when they get cheap goods off of Amazon. That's the reality. Anybody who thinks any differently does not understand the way that the global economy works. And it is this reliance on the just-in-time logistics from the Far East, particularly China, that drives this U.S.-American economy. You start isolating other trading partners, inflation is going to go through the roof. That was what Jerome Powell, the Fed chair, was talking about. That is his concern, and his concerns tend to be right. I would trust Jerome Powell on global economic policy and strategy more so than Donald Trump and his economic advisors, because they've already fallen on their face.
And coming back to you, Nick, I mean, they have both sides have very different ways of operating. You've got Trump with his transactional approach, and the EU and their more rules-based, values-driven way of approaching things. Will they clash, do you think?
Well, here it's also fascinating because actually that expression, the words, these coded words, rules-based, value-driven, were actually coined by right-wing neoconservative politicians in Washington, D.C. in the George W. Bush, Dick Cheney era. But of course, Trump and his entourage, they hate neoconservatism, right? So the first thing they did, before being elected again 9 months ago, Trump made sure to get rid of the neoconservatives in his own party, right? So he completely eviscerated, eliminated the policy thinkers in Washington who coined the terms. They invented the terms, values-driven, rules-based. And so now they're orphaned. And their only hope now is people like, Justin Trudeau or Emmanuel Macron or Ursula. So they think that Ursula von der Leyen and Antonio Costa and Emmanuel Macron are the heralds of the rules-based, value-driven world order. Of course it's a joke. It's a cruel joke. So Trump is not against, values or rules, right? And I'm not defending Trump.
I'm not. Some would debate that, I think, Nick.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm trying to sound cynical because Trump is an ultra realist, just like Chairman Xi Jinping in Beijing, right? So I'm trying to sound cynical on purpose because these people, the Chinese Communist Party or the Trump White House, are not opposed to rules or values. It's just that they have a Machiavellian, cold vision of the international economic, financial, trade order. And so the Chinese and the Americans, they believe in that new great game, that power play. And power play doesn't mean the law of the jungle. It doesn't mean chaos, right? It means keep the rules, but of course, the rules will be implemented, will be applied in a very different way than what the Europeans would like to. And this is, I think, the reason why the Europeans are shocked and they're frustrated. And the past 6, 7 months have been horrible for politicians, governments, prime ministers all over Europe, especially Germany, France, Holland, Belgium, these countries, Western Europe has been in shock and they feel betrayed by America because, the Western European policymakers, they got used to that neoconservative, Bush-Cheney, Tony Blair, neoliberal worldview. And now because that neoliberal worldview is collapsing, they're desperate. And I will conclude on that. In that balance of power between China and America on the one hand and the EU on the other, the critical issue is GDP growth. In spite of all that Trump did in the past 6, 7 months, and I agree, many of the decisions which Trump took in the past 7 months, they were a bit erratic or improvised. He shocked the system constantly. In spite of all the shocks coming out from the White House and the disorganization, blah, 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 and the improvisation very often coming from the White House, the American growth engine is humming. Look at the S&P 500, the NASDAQ, the Dow Jones Index. They're breaking records every day. So the American growth engine is doing quite well. The Chinese growth engine, in spite of all the trade war which happened in the past 7 months and all the shocks which Trump put on the world trade system, the Chinese economy is also doing quite well. Which part of the world today is growing at less than 1% per annum? It is Western Europe. So today, Belgium, Holland, Germany, France, their economy is close to stagnation. That is also why, in that balance of power, Trump is stronger because he knows that they're desperate.
Okay. We got that point. Justin, I'll come to you. So when we're looking at these talks, and he's talking very much about renegotiating the tariffs, when we come to that August 1st deadline, if Trump has failed to get some big trade deals on the board, are we looking at trouble for him and trouble in the bond markets again?
Simple answer here, Mark, is yes. I mean, the bottom line here is, the reason why we've seen the line, the goal line pushed to the right and to the right on every tariff trade deal that he's brought up is because he knows that he cannot drop the hammer like that. The reality is, with all due respect to Nick in that view, what everybody has to realize is the greatest U.S. global influence came during the days of the Baker Doctrine. James Baker's soft power was the reason why the U.S. economy grew the way it did, even after some hardships under the Reagan administration, into Bush, into Clinton, and even all the way to Obama, one would argue, and into the first term of Trump. It was the James Baker soft power doctrine that helped create that kind of world dominance. What Donald Trump has done single-handedly is reduce the influence of the U.S., show our trading partners, our biggest trading partners included. Canada is looking at doing deals with India and Brazil. Mexico, the same thing. They're giving them alternatives. Until we realize, and until Trump realizes that it's soft power that makes us the best trading partner and gives us the best influence, the ability to deal with both the political and the economic side, we're going to continue to be in this free fall.
Okay.
We
Okay.
cannot use.
Okay, I'm going to have to cut you off there, unfortunately. We're just out of time. One thing I do know is that whenever we have you on, Justin, you'll mention the Baker Doctrine. And whenever we have you on, Nick, you'll definitely mention Cheney and Bush and Blair. We tick those boxes here. And I'm now going to go and see if windmills really do upset Wales. Thank you very much. Justin Thomas Russell, Global Foreign Policy Centre Executive Director, and Meher Nicola Fursley, Director of the EU Asian Centre. Thank you both for being on the programme. Thanks a lot. Now in Scotland, Trump and von der Leyen navigate tariffs, migration and energy divides. The world watches as transatlantic ties hang in the balance. That brings us to the end of today's Think Tank, which always unveils the complexities of our changing world. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for more updates here on Q News.